Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our latest webinar. And thanks for joining us again this week. This week, we're going to be looking at federation, what that means. It's actually a way of enhancing the way we're able to collaborate across forces and partners, and potentially reducing some of the overheads for the IT team whilst maintaining that security. And in some ways, federation is actually more secure than the current practices of setting up emails and meetings and things like that. But we'll go into the detail in a couple of minutes. I've got a couple of guests with us today. I've got Tom Connor, who's quite a familiar face across the NEP. Most of you will know him from our technical team. And I've got Phil Wilkinson in as well from South Yorkshire and Humberside Police, who's going to be sharing their experience from the forces point of view as well. So usual precursors before we get started. So again, we do really welcome your feedback about the webinars, and we want to know what you want us to cover. We've already had some really good feedback from last week's webinar in terms of some questions that have raised. Or if you can scan that with your phone, you can open the feedback form, or there's a nice simple bit.ly. You can pass that on to us. It really does help us to understand what we should be focusing on. And over the next couple of weeks, we've got some really interesting stuff coming up. Next week, we're going to be looking at accessibility across the 365 space. And then, as you know, the NEP does come to a close in March, so we are bringing in some of the wider police digital service content. So the week after, we've got the national standards team coming in to talk about how you can have some influence over the national standards, how you can access them, and how you can use them to leverage better value moving forward. And then we're going to be looking at how GESIP can work across the 365 suite the following week. So please do keep an eye on the webinar website, the transformation.police.uk/events website, or on the enabling centre where all these are. So I'm going to get cracking into with Phil now and start talking about what federating means for South Yorkshire and Humberside Police. So Phil, could you explain your role first of all?
Yeah, sure. I'm the lead technical architect delivering NEP for Humberside and South Yorkshire Police. We're a shared IT service supporting both forces up in the northeast.
So Phil, what does federation mean for you?
Federation for us, it's something we've had access to and been using for a while. It gives us the ability to have the same presence awareness and direct chat functionality amongst our staff and officers to support them, but extending that out to our partners. So it might be our Microsoft partner or our force partners in the Yorkshire region, or even wider than that with yourselves at Police Digital.
In fact, you know, we've done a lot of work using chat and collaboration, but it's not the same as guest access, is it?
No, it's not. It gives you like that. Like I say, that internal feel for communication with partners, but in a more secure manner than full guest access, and it's instant. It gives you the chat presence, the presence awareness. Sorry, so for knowing whether your contacts outside of force are available to quickly drop that message to them and likely to get a response back. We can all fire off an email and we'll sit there waiting for the response, and you don't necessarily get that out of office immediate reply. You know whether you're going to get something if the green light's there and you can see that your partner colleague is in force today or is in and working. So it's great for that.
So in terms of the key differences, once you set up a federation with an organisation, a force or a partner, do you need to be specifying which users are involved?
Absolutely not. No, all users from that federated partner are available. You just need to know what that user's email address is or their contact details, and you can check on their presence. The federation does need to be both directions. So because of the NEP blueprint on whitelisting domains as opposed to blacklisting them in that team's federation, it does need to be we need to have set up federation with yourselves at PDS, and PDS need to have set up federation with our domains at South Yorkshire and at Humberside.
And I suppose what's the biggest difference between guest access and federation or external access, as it's sometimes called by Microsoft, is you still maintain all the security around your files. It's just basically chat, screen share and ad hoc chat groups, isn't it, that Federation gives?
It is, yeah, and it means that there's no need to create all those guest accounts for those partners, and you don't then have to manage those guest accounts as well, because obviously we don't all have manageability of our partners' accounts.
So in terms of federation, I think it is something that we're perhaps not utilising, and we've actually been sending reports out to forces recently recommending that they start looking at federation. But I'm going to bring Tom in now, and we'll come back to you in a second, Phil.
Sure.
So Tom, in terms of what it means from a technical point of view.
What you have within Office 365, as Phil was saying, is you have the ability of defining the domains or the organizations that you want to work with. And this was one of the key things as to, from a design point of view, why we standardized on the naming formats, both in terms of the domain name, so all are adopting the forcename.police.uk, but also how that identity mirrors across policing as well. So standardizing on a user's email address, a user's identity, and for federation, it's called their SIP address. They all follow the same format of first dot last name at forcename.police.uk. So again, whether you are sending an email, inviting a guest, or going to be working with another police force via federation, you know you've got that common naming standard across everyone. So it's really simple to set up. So I'll look at it just initially from the technical side. This is something that would be carried out by your IT team, but again, I'll show you how straightforward it is. And then we can look at what are the different experiences based on having a conversation with a guest user who has been invited into your tenant, and then a federated user, and what that experience is and how you can tell the two apart. So the first step is just going into the Teams administrator. Again, elevated rights via your admin team to do this.
So there's only a handful of people in force who've got this right, isn't it, Tom?
Absolutely, yeah. So say this would be your IT team, but once it's set up once, it is at that point set up for federation with that force by any user. Couple of kind of considerations around adding a force into this. Given forces have all followed the NEP blueprint, we know we have that national alignment in terms of the assurance piece. What we would really encourage is police forces to be adding in other police forces. Hopefully, you know, that confidence around those blueprint designs, that national assurance level would negate any requirement for an assessment. But if you're working with a third party, there may be an involvement of, you know, information management, information security to do an element of an assessment to actually, is it appropriate that we provide a federation service with this partner? So going into Teams, we just expand the users tab and then just click external access. And this is the section here, the external organizations. And as I said, by default, we only allow specific external domains. That's defined as part of the blueprint, so that will be set. And then it's just a case of adding in the domain that you want to add in underneath here. So what we have within the enabling center, within the force collaboration team site, is we have a document, and that document details these steps. But it also provides a list of all of the domains that are used within policing. So these are the lists that you would use to then populate your internal federation list, and that would ensure that if other forces also follow this, we then get that matrix where every other force is able to directly communicate with everybody else. So
everybody, we have started getting some questions in. Use the chat side to let us know your questions or concerns, and let us know if you're already federating. Just pop it into the chat.
So adding a domain. So let's add Microsoft, for example, to this chat. Micro, if I could spell. Add Microsoft. Click done. It has now appeared in the list. Scrolling down and clicking save. That is now adding Microsoft into that list. So now if I just flip into a Teams session, this is what a Teams user would see when they then want to look for a user. So initially, let's look at a new chat, and we're going to be talking to a user that is added to our tenant as a guest. So this isn't using federation, but this user has already gone through the process and is a guest within our tenant. So they're both the same names. So let me do a search on myself, because this is linked in with PDS. So I've been added as my user into this test tenant that we've got here. So clicking on my name, I can see I have guests next to it. I have all of this functionality, which is the same functionality you have when you have an internal user. So I can share files, stream, etc., etc. So I can just send a message. The tricky bit, though, is what does this look like from an end user who's receiving that message? So I've now got my, let me actually just bring up my, do it via a browser. I've got my Teams environment here. Now, I've received a chat. I'm sitting in my PDS tenant, but actually that message has gone through to what we call as it's our NEP showcase. So I've had no notification that that chat has come through, and the only way that I can see it is to actually transfer into that other tenant, flip to it. That gives me access to all of the teams that I'm a member of hosted within that tenant, but ultimately I've got to do that before I can see and reply to that message. So an end user experience on an ad hoc day-to-day basis isn't the best. If you're working with a team and you're collaborating and you're, creating a virtual team, then this works brilliantly because you have access to all of the files, you have access to all of the teams that you are able to work with through that standard guest collaboration. So let's just have a quick look at, let me just move this back to my PDS tenant. Let's have a look at what this looks like from a perspective of how I would send to a federated user, and what that looks like when that federated user is both set up and not set up. So let me go back to, so this is my test environment. So I'll do another search. I've already sort of run through this a couple of times, which is why if I do a search, it is seeing it. It's because it's already found it once. But what you would do is follow that that email address format. So if I just do it as I would, into the search, what it will do is it will actually let me just bring up so it comes up as external. So by seeing that it is set to external, I can now send a message. You can see I've got a limited number of options in the bottom here. I can't share files. I can't do anything like that. I've pretty much got some GIFs and some emojis. I get a box here to show me that I am speaking with an external individual. And when I go back into my PDS tenant, I can see that that chat has come directly into my home force, so it appears alongside all of my other chats, and I have some notification that this is coming in from an external user, and the fact that I can see the domain that that this user has contacted me from. Now I can set up a video call, and I can also set up a an audio call, and I can also invite some additional people. So again, you could bring in people from an external user again, or you can bring in somebody from your own force tenant. But again, that functionality would be limited based on the fact that there are external users as part of this group. Now, I know we've had some forces who are a little hesitant around the adopting federating around policing. I guess a couple of real considerations here is, firstly, this isn't functionality that users don't currently have access to. This is the same functionality if I was to set up a meeting, send a meeting invite out to an external individual, and we both join that meeting. I can send chat, I can have a video call, I can share my screen. So the capabilities there, you're just doing it in an ad hoc fashion to avoid the creation of a meeting invite to actually establish that chat and video. Again, from a point of view, as if you wanted to share a document or just be able to present a document, this is a really quick way to do it, as opposed to attaching that document to an email and sending it outside the organization. So, a good example may be, something with CPS around a charging decision. You could quickly have a quick call, share a document, share a video, present it from your screen, and that way they could view it. But the content isn't leaving your organization.
And that's much more than setting up a meeting with somebody, because once you send the meeting link out, anybody could be forwarded onto that link, couldn't they?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, there are options that you can kind of limit the forwarding, but again, it becomes more complicated, and users might not necessarily know that capability is there. But doing this, it just allows you to have that very quick chat. I kind of think of it in a similar way to, back in the day, the first time televisions landed telephones landed in a force, you may have had a force telephone network that allowed you to call anybody within the the force, but actually it was only a number of people that could go outside of the force on an external line because there was cost associated with it, example. And then a bit later on, we're going to have the ability of having telephone calls into a neighboring force, and you would prefix it with 03 or whatever. This is actually just giving you that capability. So it's taking that Teams presence, chat, and video, and just allowing you to extend it to those predefined nominated users. And I think the other good thing just to consider is all of this chat is covered under compliance and search. So as your information management team, you can do a full search against your tenant, look at specific users, and determine that those specific users have had conversations with these users. And I'll just see if I can just bring up a search here. Slightly long-winded while that comes up, but what it means is that I can go back over time and look at the message. Who was it sent from? So this is within my showcase tenant. I can see that this user sent a message to this user at this date and time, and I can read all of the text. And even if a message is deleted, I send out a little bit of a sensitive message, obviously a little bit untoward. So I've sent a message out to this external user. They've replied with this content. But if you look at my Teams chats, that's myself to myself, which is the external one, that isn't appearing within this chat thread because I deleted the message. But that doesn't matter from a compliance perspective. That information is all fully logged, and I can see exactly what is happening. So again, there's that confidence that all of that is managed accordingly, and as a force, you could be confident that you have those controls in place.
Brilliant, thanks. If we go to the questions first of all, I'm going to get this question to Phil first. So does Federation replace guest user access or complement it as if a user wanted to access files and Teams as well? Because there is a difference between the two, isn't there?
There is. It certainly doesn't replace guest access. It's a I guess it's a limited functionality, if you like. Yeah, absolutely. It gives you some of the ability, some of the functionality that guest access gives you some of the functionality. But Federation is a limited version of guest access, is what we're trying to say. So once it's set up for an organization, it's set up for everybody in that organization, whereas guest access is on a per user basis, isn't it? It's for more, I guess, long-term collaboration work than short ad hoc.
So one use case could be something like a road traffic incident at a border between two forces. Both forces both send resources to it. They're both working on it and collaborating. You know the name of the officer you're working with. If you're federated with that force, you could set up an instant chat with them for later terms to catch up on any information and things like that. And you wouldn't need to involve IT. It could be done at 2 in the morning live as they go on. Well, there's another question from Emma, and I know who Emma is. And this, would this allow? I'm going to go to Tom with this one. Would this allow intranets, newsletters to be shared across forces and Teams and other Microsoft apps?
No. So from a Federation perspective, this is purely looking at that chat, video call, audio call capability. If you're wanting to give access to the data that sits within your tenant, whether that be a flow or intranet pages or similar, then that would have to come in via a guest. You can publish an external, and David, help me in terms of newsletters, Sway, thank you. Yeah. You can publish an external Sway, but that would be a public, as in anybody with that link could access it. The only way you can tie down so only specific individuals can have access to that sway is if they're a member of your guest, and you can then select them as part of those permissions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know where Emma's coming from on this one, and it's not the solution, but it does allow collaboration. You know, and so if a member of the East Midlands Serious Crime Unit wants to talk to a PC on a certain beat and just ask a quick question in a secure environment, they can do that.
Yeah.
But perhaps not the full guest access that we'd want to do.
It's also, just want to say, David, it kind of complements the guest side as well. I mean, if you've got a team that is working closely together and they're using the guest access to get access to documents, to get access to teams, actually using the federated chat, if they're, say, within their home tenant, they can still have those point-to-point chats with members in the other team without having to physically go in and change the team tenant that they're associated with to be able to then send a message as a guest user. They can send that message directly as their sort of standard identity.
Yeah, absolutely. We use that to great effect with the recent GCF migration, liaising with yourselves at PDS on that. It worked really quickly. It meant we were able to proceed through that migration much faster.
Okay, I'll go to another question. This one's probably coming towards you, Tom, I'm afraid. Did the Skype infrastructure create any issues with users being able to contact it when federated?
Yeah, so again, there are some dependencies on how this is set up within Force. What you can do is create a hybrid relationship between your Skype environment on premise and Teams. You can then run Teams in a number of ways, whether it's islands modes or cab mode. But ultimately, the Teams federation is the point of entry. So the request and all of the bits behind the scene point to Teams, and then through that hybrid relationship with the Skype on premise, it is then able to pass those messages down, as I say, but it is some additional infrastructure and configuration needed to get that working.
Okay, a question from Katie here, and happy to decide who wants to take it. So, can you create a chat group with somebody who's federated? I thought on the first slide it indicated that you couldn't, but the demo suggested that you can. Tom?
Yeah, so I think with this, functionality is changing, and with this, certainly the testing that I was doing, again, I think I was expecting it to be very much a one-to-one, but you can now have those chats. So you could have an external via federation, and then add in some additional internal people to create a group. In that, though, that functionality around sharing files, for example, is limited because you've got that external person as part of that group.
Okay, a question I'm going to send to Phil first of all. So David's asking, Phil referenced the overhead of managing guest accounts, especially when if the Force user doesn't know if the partner is still employed in their Force or not. Obviously, this is slightly different because if they've no longer got access to their Force tenants, they've no longer got access to your tenants. What's your experience around that, Phil?
To be fair, we've not really used guest access a huge amount. It's difficult for me to sort of quantify that against how much we're using federated chat within the forces. I know we're using it significantly within IT. In terms of the managing of guest accounts, yeah, it's maybe one that Tom might be able to help better.
So definitely. So there's a couple of things. Because the guest account isn't a separate account, it is directly linked back to the account within the home force or the organization that you invite in that guest from. So when that originating identity is disabled or removed, that will automatically ensure that their access through to your tenant is also removed. Takes a little bit of tidying up to do, but again, that is covered, but the permissions themselves will be removed. The other side of that is around the access reviews, and this is a key part of the design. So as a team owner, you could determine that, whether it be a 3-monthly review, even if somebody is still employed by that partner, you would determine that access to that content that you're sharing is actually no longer valid, and then you can revoke that access. So again, there is 2 levels, but if an individual leaves their home organization, that will ensure that they don't have access to your tenant.
Okay, last couple of questions before we wrap up. So a quick one around CPS was mentioned. It would be an individual federation between each force and the CPS reciprocating, yep. Wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because the CPS, they've implemented Office 365. They don't have the NEP blueprint, as it were. So, that would still be a local decision as part of that partner piece. Given the vetting, the organisation's security standards that they adhere to, we would hope it would be very light touch compared to, say, going to a non-government partner or agency and looking at bringing them as part of federation. You may do sort of some further due diligence around that process.
And one last one from David at Northumbria. Is it right that presence is visible but because of federation? I think we've covered that.
Correct. Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. So just thank you to Phil, and we'll come back to things. We are going to run a workshop on this because there's quite a bit more we can get into around exploiting both this and some of the other functionality around collaboration in terms of how we can join things together. So we're holding the workshop on Tuesday the 8th of March at 1 p.m. The link's there, or visit the Enabling Centre. There's a link on the Enabling Centre where you can register to join us. We do want to send a poll out and get some feedback in terms of how many people are looking to federate. It should be a case of why wouldn't you now, because you're not going to lose any control of your files or your management or your security. You're getting more audit capability, but you're enabling ad hoc collaboration on a very low level to happen across the organisation with colleagues. So that could really help. I've certainly used it in terms of trying to get hold of a staff officer or a chief officer, just being able to go, oh, there, I can see they're available, quick chat, got 5 minutes, saved about 5 emails and 2 hours of work. It can save a lot of it in terms of efficiency. A couple of closing points for me. We have now announced the new date for the Police Digital Summit, which is taking place on the 12th and 13th of May in person. It's real. It's going to be a live event. So you can now register for that. The details are on the dedicated website there, policedigital.org. It is free for policing, but obviously we don't quite pay for your hotels. So yeah, we are really trying to interest to get that. And we'll have suppliers, policing and government leaders around that one. And of course, as I mentioned last week and at the top, the NEP does close in March, and we really want to get your feedback as colleagues in policing about what's been going on. So there is a survey that's available. It's only available till lunchtime on Monday. We do want to get your views, whether you're frontline and you've used 365 as a result of this, or your program lead, change lead, SRO, whoever you are, you've been touched by the rollout of 365 and the NEP program. Please share your views. If you don't know an answer, if you don't think it's relevant, just move on to the next question. That really does help us a great deal. Tom's popped the link into where the link of the domains are, so those of you in policing can get hold of that. We've just got a couple of questions there about what's the maximum number of accounts we can have. Tom, I think you've already answered that one. In a nutshell.
Yeah, as I say, by default, it is 5 guest licenses for every 1 licensed user. So there is no limit on federation, but there is the option that you can flip to a monthly usage. You get 50,000 guest users for free. And if you go beyond that 50,000 in any 1 month, then you would just pay an additional amount for those.
And when you look at some of the guest usages, you find that you might have set a guest account and a little team up, but most of it's just chat anyway. And there is that friction of having to swap domains, where this actually reduces that. So in terms of the user experience for our front line, for our back office, for anybody else, this can actually make things a lot easier and be that trigger to go into the guest account if they're using it. But sometimes you'll find that a lot of the work can be done without the guest account, so it could really help with some benefits and reduce the overhead and improve the flexibility without losing any control. So we're just approaching the 1/2 of the hour. I want to thank you everybody for joining us. Next week we are talking accessibility. Really want you to join that, because again, we've covered this a few times over the year, but it's constantly evolving. The improvements to the accessibility across the platform constantly getting better, and at the end of the day, anybody can benefit from some of these accessibility functions. So please do join us next week share the webinars on, and please, that final appeal, lessons learned survey. If you need any links, just get in touch with us via email and we'll send you a link out. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next week.